and welcome to the Terry Talks Movies. This time around I'm talking about the Oscars, not this one. Not the one where John Cena got his kid off and ended up looking like a condom full of sausages, and Cillian Murphy got Best Actor for Oppenheimer. No, not that one. I'm talking about your historical Oscars. All the ones going back to 1929. And in some of those, over that vast amount of time. The Academy's done this 96 times. No kidding, 96 times. And in those 96 attempts at turning what is essentially a trade show and a trade award ceremony into something that people care about, they screwed up a lot. They did a lot of dumb stuff. So what I'm going to do is go through the almost 100-year history of the Oscars and point out the ones that they really flubbed and which movie should have won instead of the one that did. I've got a few of those. So we'll get started and drop into the magical year of 1936. Before 1936, there weren't too many enormous stuff-ups with the Oscars, apart from the fact that the first actor they gave the Best Actor Oscar to later became a Nazi. Things went pretty swimmingly. I actually did a video about that guy. I'll put it up here. His name's Emil Jannings. But 1936 is the first one that leapt out at me as being a bit off. The movie that won is a biopic, The Great Ziegfeld, about Florence Ziegfeld, a great big New York theatrical entrepreneur whose girlfriend he first started dating when she was 15 years old. But The Great Ziegfeld, starring William Powell, is kind of entertaining and doesn't really mention the fact that he had an underage teenage girlfriend when he himself was in his 40s. So The Great Ziegfeld was the first one that really stuffed things up. The rest of the field's kind of interesting. You got Anthony Adverse, an historical adventure which starred Frederick March and Olivia de Havilland. That was quite popular at the time. You've got Dodsworth, which I'm going to talk more about in a moment. Libeled Lady, which was a screwball comedy, also starring William Powell and Jean Harlow. Then you got Mr. Deeds Goes to Town, a Frank Capra movie with Gary Cooper and Jean Arthur. Romeo and Juliet, interesting version of Romeo and Juliet in 1936. Leslie Howard was in his 40s playing Romeo, and Norma Shearer was in her 30s playing Juliet. A little bit older than the text suggests they should be, but it was very popular. It also had John Barrymore and, oddly enough, Andy Devine in it. That one is now forgotten amongst many other versions. Then we got San Francisco with Clark Gable, Jeanette MacDonald, Spencer Tracy. Great big movie with a very interesting and quite well done earthquake sequence. There we have Paul Mooney in The Story of Louis Pasteur, which is another biopic, this time about Louis Pasteur. Then we have A Tale of Two Cities with Ronald Colman, which was a very popular Dickensian adaptation, and a little bit of a musical comedy called Three Smart Girls, which had, amongst other people, Ray Milland and Deanna Durbin in it. But the one I'm going to go for, and the one I think should have won, is Dodsworth. Really good film, directed by William Wyler, starring Walter Houston, Ruth Chatterton, Mary Astor and David Niven. It's about a middle-aged industrialist who goes on a long-awaited holiday with his wife overseas as he's kind of slipping into retirement, and his wife starts acting like she's 20 years younger than she is. She's played by Ruth Chatterton. Dodsworth's an interesting film because it is about a marriage breakup and about a person finding what really matters to them later in life. It was a little bit ahead of its time, and Walter Houston's very good at it. In fact, I've got a copy of Dodsworth. This one is a Taiwanese copy because I couldn't find one anywhere else. And it's a very mature and adult kind of film for its time, and quite sophisticated for its time. And I like it a lot more than any other. So for 1936, I'm going to go with Dodsworth because I think it's a film that doesn't get enough recognition amongst the cinephiles. I think it deserves the gong a lot more than a biopic about a theatrical entrepreneur with a taste for underaged women. Then we'll move ahead a few years to 1939, the year that Gone with the Wind won the Oscar. I'm not a fan of Gone with the Wind. In fact, I did a video about it too, and I'll post it up here. Gone with the Wind was, even in 1939, racist. The NAACP protested against the movie, in fact. And I watched it for the first time a couple of years ago, and not a fan. But there are a bunch of other films of that year that are worth checking out and worth getting the gong. You got Dark Victory starring Bette Davis and Humphrey Bogart and George Brent and Ronald Reagan, who later went on to lesser roles. You got Goodbye Mr. Chips with Robert Donat and Greer Garson, which is a sentimental favourite and quite worthy, and also it talks to the importance of inspiring children and education. There was a little movie called Love Affair, which is kind of interesting, with Charles Boyer and Irene Dunne. Then we got Mr. Smith Goes to Washington with James Stewart and Jean Arthur and Claude Rains and Edward Arnold. A naive fairy tale about American politics and how an honest person can prevail against the entrenched interests of very wealthy men. Like I said, it's a fairy tale. Very popular movie and quite entertaining, but still a little unsophisticated, let's say. Then we've got the wonderful Ernst Lubitsch movie, The Notchka, which later became a musical. Script by Billy Wilder, directed by Ernst Lubitsch. What's not to love in this one? Greta Garbo, Melvyn Douglas. It's a great comedy about the clash between Soviet Russia and the repression they had at the time, and Americans' more laissez-faire attitude to things. A lot of fun. It was the first comedy that Garbo did, and it was a bit of a shock to people, but they loved it. Then we got Lewis Milestone's adaptation of the play by John Steinbeck of Mice and Men, with Burgess Meredith and Lon Chaney Jr. Again, it's quite a powerful movie. A little bit had the sharp edges of it taken off by censorship again, but still a worthwhile movie. Then we have Stagecoach, one of the great classic westerns, which John Ford directed, starring Claire Trevor and John Wayne in John Wayne's breakout role. I mean, that one's worthwhile as well. Then we have The Wizard of Oz. I'm not particularly a fan of The Wizard of Oz, mostly because I think Judy Garland as Dorothy is insufferably, painfully cringeworthy. A lot of people disagree with it, but for me, her character and the way she plays it, even though she was quite young at the time, just grates on me like fingernails down on a chalkboard. And then we have the romantic period drama Wuthering Heights with Merle Oberon, Laurence Olivier and David Niven. Not my kind of film, but still worthwhile. If I was going to go with a movie that I think deserves it more than Gone with the Wind, I'd go with any of the others. But to break it down a little further, I'd probably select Ninotchka, because I think it's a very witty movie, and it's also got the killer combination of Billy Wilder and Ernst Lubitsch. Other people may choose other movies among them, and there aren't really any bad other choices, I think, depending on where your tastes lie. But for me, I'd go with Ninotchka in 1939. I think it's a much more entertaining movie than Gone with the Wind. From there we go to 1941, and as we know, 1941 is the year that America discovered that there was a world war going on. Again, you got a very large lot of nominees there. The movie that won was How Green Was My Valley, which was kind of a sentimental adaptation by John Ford of Philip Dunn's novel about life among Welsh mining towns, with Walter Pidgeon, Maureen O'Hara, Donald Crisp, Anna Lee and Roddy McDowall in an early role. It's kind of a good movie, but I don't think it's the best movie of the year. Nobody talks about it now. You've got Blossoms in the Dust, which is a biopic directed by Mervyn LeRoy with Greer Garson and Walter Pidgeon. It's about a woman who helped orphan children find homes. It's one of those kind of worthy films without being particularly sophisticated or memorable. We've got Here Comes Mr. Jordan, a fantasy romantic comedy. Boxer gets accidentally taken to heaven wrongly and is given a second chance back on Earth. It's got Robert Montgomery, Claude Rains, Evelyn Keyes, who I love, James Gleeson, Edward Everett Horton. A nice, fun film. Hold Back the Dawn, directed by Mitchell Leeson, where Charles Boyer plays a Romanian gigolo who marries an American woman in Mexico in order to get American citizenship, and then falls in love with her. Rookie move. Bad career move. It's one of those movies that plays on the romantic charms of Charles Boyer, but nobody knows about it now. Then we've got Little Foxes with Herbert Marshall, Teresa Wright, Richard Carlson, about aristocratic society in the Deep South with Betty Davis, Herbert Marshall, Teresa Wright. Not the best Betty Davis movie even of the time, but it was popular and it did that thing of kind of pretending that rich white people in the South were acceptable in any reasonable way. Then we get on to some interesting things. There's another movie called One Foot in Heaven, which was another biopic about a guy who becomes a doctor in rural Iowa in 1904. It stars Frederick March, Martha Scott, Beulah Bondi, Gene Lockhart. Totally forgotten movie now. It has no cultural impact at all. We've got Sergeant York, which was a World War I drama about the most decorated officer in America in World War I, Alvin York, played by Gary Cooper. This was one of those movies that Warner Brothers put in to try to prepare America for going to war in World War II by showing how honourable and tough and patriotic Alvin York was in World War I. Then we've got Hitchcock's Suspicion with Cary Grant and Joan Fontaine. I haven't seen this one in a very long time, but I really should rewatch it. And then we've got the last one, The Maltese Falcon, John Huston's first film as a director. You've got the wonderful ensemble there of Bogart, Mary Astor, Peter Lorre, Sidney Greenstreet, Elisha Cook Jr. This is the movie that should have won. It's immensely entertaining. It's ongoingly entertaining. It has an incredible rewatchability to it. And unlike movies like One Foot in Heaven, it's got a 4K release. So for 1941, I'm definitely going to go with The Maltese Falcon. I think it just hits all of the sweet spots of a great movie. 1943, they got things right as well, with Casablanca winning, so I'm not going to go into that. In 1944, they did not stick the landing because the movie that won is a movie called Going My Way, with Bing Crosby playing a Catholic priest, back in the day when that was an acceptable thing for people to be, particularly a Catholic priest that works with children. Got Barry Fitzgerald doing his cliched old Irish priest kind of gig. There were better movies in 1944. You got Alexander Knox in Wilson, another biopic about Woodrow Wilson. Kind of okay, directed by Henry King, produced by Daryl Zanuck. Charles Coburn's in there as well, Geraldine Fitzgerald, Cedric Hardwicke, Vincent Price, which is a saving grace on that. Next up, we got Since You Went Away, an American epic drama film about the American home front during World War II. Claudette Colbert, Jennifer Jones, Joseph Cotton, Shirley Temple in her first kind of grown-up role. A worthwhile film, and again, it's part of that propaganda machine that started at the end of 1941 when America did join World War II. And then we've got George Cukor's Gaslight with Ingrid Bergman, Joseph Cotton and Angela Lansbury and Charles Boyer. I mean, gaslight is still a term in the English language. It's a movie that created a way of looking at certain human behaviours that are egregious and wrong. And Gaslight still holds up. There's a monstrous creepiness to Charles Boyer's character and the way he treats Ingrid Bergman's character in this movie. He's the first poster boy for toxic masculinity. And I watched this a couple of years ago, and it still has a chilling realism to it. And then, of course, we've got Billy Wilder's Double Indemnity, based on the novel by James N. Cain. You've got Edward G. Robinson, of course, and then you've got Fred McMurray and Barbara Stanwyck as the murderers. It's just a perfect movie in some ways. It's at the front edge of film noir. It shows us weak men and femme fatales and dogged investigator who almost loves the man he is chasing for the insurance scam. And now the insurance investigator is played by Edward G. Robinson. I'm going with Double Indemnity over Gaslight. I think it's one of the precursors or at the front edge of film noir as a beloved film genre. And that'd be my pick for 1944. Then we'll move on a bit to 1952 and The Greatest Show on Earth, a Cecil B. DeMille epic movie about a circus with Charlton Heston, Cornel Wilde, Betty Hutton, James Stewart, Dorothy Lamour, Gloria Graham. A really good ensemble cast, but still not the best movie of the year. It's the same year where the other nominees are for the most part, pretty good. You got Hine in the Stanley Kramer movie, which Rio Bravo was a response to, with Gary Cooper and Grace Kelly. Beautifully shot film, but I'm not sure whether it sits well as a Western. I think the way the Gary Cooper character plays it, trying to get help from townspeople as these three killers come up against him, it makes it almost an anti-Western, and that cruels it for me. I respect it, but I don't like it. Then we've got Ivanhoe, a historical drama with Robert Taylor trying to play an English guy, Elizabeth Taylor, Joan Fontaine. Swashbuckling movie, not great, kind of interesting, but not great. Then we got The Quiet Man, a John Ford movie with Maureen O'Hara and John Wayne and Victor McLaughlin, Barry Fitzgerald, Ward Bond. Kind of amusing film about an American boxer who goes back to Ireland where his ancestors are from, meets Maureen O'Hara, has fights, yada yada yada. Not great for me. I think it's kind of amusing and I think it's a little bit of fun, but it didn't really grab me when I've watched it. The movie I'm picking to win for 1952, Moulin Rouge, not the Baz Luhrmann Dog's Breakfast, but the 1952 version, directed by John Huston, which has José Ferrer playing Henri de Toulouse-Lautrec, Zsa Zsa Gabor, Suzanne Flon, Eric Pullman, Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing. Beautifully evokes the paintings of Toulouse-Lautrec in a wonderful way. It's a vivid, dynamic movie, tragic as well, that really does bring that world to life. I just love the movie. Of course, you've got Jose Ferrer wearing shoes on his knees to play Toulouse-Lautrec. He didn't have the stature to play the character, of course. I'm glad I've got a copy of it. I've got a Blu-ray of it because, for me, it's a tragic, beautiful film. And so for 1952, rather than an enormous, big-budget circus film, I'm going with Moulin Rouge. Just a fantastic piece of cinema. Then we move on to 1956, and the winner that year was Around the World in 80 Days, Mike Todd's epic film. Tons of guest stars retelling the Jules Verne story with David Niven and Cantor Flass and Shirley MacLaine. Kind of entertaining, but I don't think it's the best film of the year by any means. The other nominees were Friendly Persuasion, Civil War drama directed by William Wyler with Gary Cooper, Dorothy McGuire, Anthony Perkins, Richard Eyre, Robert Middleton, Mark Richmond. Marjorie Main turns up in an interesting role in this. It was another regurgitation of the American Civil War, but for me, it just doesn't rate as a movie that should be at the top of the list. We also had The King and I, the adaptation of the Rodgers and Hammerstein musical with Deborah Kerr and Yul Brynner. Beautiful film, like some of the songs. It was done in CinemaScope 55, so incredibly wide. I don't think it's the best movie of the year. We were deep into the age of the biblical epics, so of course we had The Ten Commandments, Cecil B. DeMille, Charlton Heston, of course, Yul Brynner again. He's in 2 movies that were nominated for Oscars that year. I like it. Of the biblical epics, it's one of the ones I do like. Again, it's not the best movie of the year. For that one, I'm going with Giant, a kind of modern Western, or at least a 20th century Western, with Rock Hudson, Elizabeth Taylor, James Dean, Carol Baker, Chill Wills, Mercedes Cambridge, Dennis Hopper, Sal Mineo, Rod Taylor, and Earl Holliman. I think George Stevens' Giant is the one that I would give it to. It does talk to entrenched wealth and privilege and how times change and how people have to adapt when times change. It's the last great role we got from James Dean, and I think it showed the road not taken, which, given the fact that he crashed a car and died, is probably not the right way to say that, but it shows us the potential for a future career that James Dean never got to fulfill, and for that reason I find it very interesting. Yes, it is a long, I really like it. I think it's rewatchable. I've got it on 4K, and for me that one is a much better film for the year than Around the World in 80 Days, even though Around the World in 80 Days was one of the more entertaining films of the year. And we go to 1958, where the film that won is a musical about a teenage girl being groomed to be a sex worker. Gigi with Leslie Caron and Louis Jourdan and Maurice Chevalier. Yes, there are entertaining aspects to it, but the whole centre of the plot is creepy as hell. And I don't think that that's the kind of movie that was self-aware enough to realise that. I don't think that was the most entertaining film of 1958. We had Auntie Mame with Rosalind Russell, which is a lot of fun and is very well loved by LGBTQIA plus people because it does have a very camp sensibility. Rosalind Russell's great in it. It really is a fun movie. Then we have Cat on the Hot Tin Roof. Richard Brooks directed the adaptation of Tennessee Williams' play with Elizabeth Taylor, Paul Newman and Burl Ives. Very much an over-the-top pressure cooker drama, which when I watch it these days, I see almost as a comedy because it is just so over the top. But it's still a worthwhile nominee, let's say. There are Separate Tables, an adaptation of a couple of one-act plays by Terence Rattigan. Rita Hayworth, Deborah Kerr, David Niven, Bert Lancaster, Wendy Hiller. Really interesting film, but it does show its stage-bound predecessors. It's about people living in a residential hotel. Some very complex and weird characters. The David Niven character is particularly interesting, while also being very cringeworthy. And of course, David Niven and Wendy Hiller won Academy Awards for Best Actor and Best Supporting Actress. So it is very much a worthy film. I'm probably going to go with the Defiant Ones, a very raw Stanley Kramer movie with Tony Curtis and Sidney Poitier as a couple of guys who escape a chain gang chained together. The Tony Curtis character is a racist. The Sidney Poitier character is a person of colour. And again, it's one of those worthy films, But I think it is one of those films that digs in and does have the guts to show racism and show how racism very often doesn't thrive when the people you hate are people you know at a kind of deep level. Good, honest action film, hard-punching drama, goes to places where movies of its time did not go. So I would definitely go with the Defiant ones there, even though other people may disagree. So now we get to 1964, and musicals were big in 64 and 65. Really big musicals were big, but little musicals as well. 1964, you got My Fair Lady winning, which is a fun movie and entertaining, and Rex Harrison couldn't sing, and neither could Audrey Hepburn, so they got Marnie Nixon to sing for her. I don't think it's the best film of the year. Beckett came up next, a Hal B. Wallace film about Thomas à Becket, one of those important historical dramas where they got lots of good English character actors in there. You got Richard Burton playing Thomas Becket, the Archbishop of Canterbury, Peter O'Toole playing Henry II, you got John Gielgud playing King Louis VII, our Donald Wolford's in there, Martita Hunt, Sian Phillips, Felix Aylmer. Terrific cast. Noel McGuinness is in there as well, which is kind of cool. This was one of those big tentpole movies of the time. It really did get a lot of respect. We got Mary Poppins, which didn't win either. Walt Disney, of course, with Julie Andrews and Dick Van Dyke with his incredible accent. From a technical point of view, this one was fantastic. That mixing up of animation and live action was something Disney always did well at the time. I saw it at the time when I was a very little kid on a rainy school excursion where we went to King's Cross to see it, which is a bit like going to any other red light district with a bus full of school children, which we did, and I enjoyed it at the time. Then we got Michael Kakoyannis' Zorba the Greek, which is really entertaining with Anthony Quinn, a Mexican-Irishman playing a Greek guy, and Alan Bates playing a heterosexual. Great music by Mikis Theodorakis. Fantastic, life-affirming, beautiful role. But the one you got to give it to, really, in all seriousness, is Stanley Kubrick's Dr. Strangelove. A movie that dared to satirize and mock the mutually assured destruction of the Cold War. And yes, even though Peter Sellers isn't an actor I have a lot of time for, he was great in his multiple roles. Particular shout out to Sterling Hayden, who was also fantastic. George C. Scott as well. You got to give it to Dr. Strangelove. It's a much better movie by any criterion except hummable songs than My Fair Lady. So 1964, I'd have to give it to Dr. Strangelove. In 1965, we also got a musical winning The Sound of Music, directed by Robert Wise, a director I don't particularly like, with Julie Andrews playing a character who is basically a human meringue, sweet but no substance. Christopher Plummer, Eleanor Parker, all of those kids, kind of a slightly biopic based on the Rodgers and Hammerstein musical about the Von Trapp family singers, which again whitewashes the subject matter of the biopic. Don't like it. I like the idea of running away from Nazis. I think that's a good idea if you can't kill them. I always find nuns creepy in movies. I'm sorry, but I do. And the nuns are creepy. You've got that nun joke, which I won't repeat because it'll get me demonetized. But Sound of Music just doesn't do it for me. Same year we got David Lean's adaptation of Boris Pasternak's novel Dr. Zhivago, with Omar Sharif, an Egyptian playing a Russian, Geraldine Chaplin, Julie Christie, Tom Courtenay, Alec Guinness, Rod Steiger, Rita Tushingham. A big, large, broad-scale epic film. Great to watch. Really interesting film. I don't think it is in any way David Lean's best or most accessible film, but still kind of worthy contender and a much better film for me than Sound of Music. Then we've got a Stanley Kramer film which doesn't get talked about a lot, Ship of Fools, which is basically about an ocean liner in 1933 bound to go to Germany from Mexico, with a whole bunch of people who are German citizens thrown out of Mexico by the prevailing government. Some of them want to go back there. Some of them are questioning the rise of fascism in Germany as Hitler has taken over. And yeah, it's got an enormous ensemble cast. Vivian Leigh, Simone Signoret, Jose Ferrer, Lee Marvin, Oscar Werner, Elizabeth Ashley, George Segal, Jose Greco, Michael Dunn. It's one of those movies that is painful to watch because we know what resulted after that. Again, it's one of those worthy films that Stanley Kramer did. He was always very didactic in his cinema. But the one I've got to give it to is 1,000 Clowns, with Jason Robards, Barbara Harris, Martin Balsam, Barry Gordon. Jason Robards plays an unemployed television comedy writer who has a son, and he's been unemployed, and social workers investigate his son's living conditions. It's just one of those movies that full of vivid characters, full of fun, interesting film. It kind of combines drama and comedy really well. As I said, Jason Robards, Barbara Harris, Martin Balsam, William Daniels. Martin Balsam is really good in the movie as well. It's just one of those forgotten films that when you watch it and when you find out about it, you go, wow, why haven't I heard about this film before? And I think that in itself makes it my choice over Sound of Music. Not a big film, not a film that was going to fill anybody's pockets with money, but a much more interesting film than Sound of Music. So next up we've got 1968, another year I remember vaguely. Oliver won, the adaptation of Lionel Bart's musical with Oliver Reed, Mark Lester, Bron Moody, Jack Wilde, Shani Wallace, Harry Seacombe. I remember seeing this and being bored by it when I was at school. Not my favourite musical of the time. I think it's... And then we got Funny Girl, of course, the breakout movie for Barbara Streisand, with Barbara Streisand playing Fanny Bryce. Again, it's a biopic. Barbara Streisand, Omar Sharif. Got its good moments. Directed by William Wyler. But again, I don't think it's kind of best picture worthy. One of the other nominees was Rachel, a movie everyone's forgotten now, which stars Joanne Woodward and James Olsen, Estelle Parsons, Donald Moffat's in there, Terry Kaiser, who later on played Bernie in Weekend at Bernie's. It's about a kind of aging, unmarried school teacher played by Joanne Woodward, who kind of finds her passion later in life. It was directed by Paul Newman, of course, was married to Joanne Woodward. I've only seen this one once a long time ago, but I don't remember terribly much about it. Then we have the more accurate version of Romeo and Juliet, Franco Zeffirelli's version, with Leonard Whiting and Virginia Hussey. Milo O'Shea's in there, Michael York, John McHenry, Robert Stevens. This one looks beautiful. It's a lovely looking film. Really watchable for that. The ingenues aren't necessarily the best actors in the world, but I think it is a accurate and honest adaptation of the Shakespeare play. Then we got the one that of course should have won. Another historical drama with a killer cast, The Lion in Winter, with Peter O'Toole playing Henry II, Katharine Hepburn playing Eleanor of Aquitaine, Anthony Hopkins playing Richard the Lionheart, Nigel Terry, John Castle, a very young and good looking Timothy Dalton playing the King of France. Nigel Stock's in there as well. This is a beautiful film with everybody acting at 11. The Lion in Winter should have won the Oscar over a facile and forgotten musical. It really has a lot of meat on the bone, and it's one of the great later roles for Katharine Hepburn. She wouldn't have been your first choice for playing Eleanor of Aquitaine, but she nails it 100%. So this one's getting a bit long, so I'm going to make it a two-parter. So there's the first part of the Oscar winners that I think should have won, as opposed to the ones that actually did in this universe. I kind of like a lot of the movies I was just talked about, and I want to watch them again straight away. But unfortunately, because I just don't have the time to, I can't. But I have decided I'm going to rewatch some things like Giant and a few others that I've mentioned. They really do deserve a lot more respect that I really want to look forward to, and my cat is not on straight. That's it for this time. Thanks a lot for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and leave a comment. Even if it's just an emoji, leave me a comment. Check out some of the playlists on the channel. You can also support the channel by donating at the YouTube page or by becoming a patron at patreon.com/terrytalksmovies, where you could also get my monthly Spotify music playlist. Until next time, watch some good movies, watch some bad movies, watch some Oscar movies, watch John Cena with an envelope strapped to his junk, and I'll catch you next time.